So the story of Boaz and Ruth happens during the book of Judges, if that helps you with the timeline. So after endless judges that have got worse and worse, or the people had turned further and further away from God, finally the people ask for a king. And God sends the prophet Samuel to say, this is a bad plan. You really don't want a king. They'll just lord things over you and take you where you do not want to be. The people are insistent, and with the very noticeable reasoning, we want to be just like everybody else. God's people have lost the plot in terms of what it means to be God's people. So God relents, and through the prophet Samuel appoints Saul as king. He's a good man. He's a mighty warrior. He wants the best for his people, and he starts well, and then he goes slowly and then very quickly downhill into disobedience and madness. And in the middle of that period of time, God tells the prophet Samuel, I'm choosing a completely new king to start again and to have a great line. So Samuel goes off to the place where God directs him, and of all places, God directs him to the tiniest place you could find. Although it's not that far from Jerusalem, it's insignificant in the extreme. It's a small place called Bethlehem. And having got to Bethlehem, the prophet Samuel is directed towards the household of a man called Jesse. Now here it's useful for you to know that Ruth and Boaz, who we spoke about in the last video, they have a son called Obed. Obed has a son called Jesse. And Jesse has 8 sons and we think 2 daughters. 7 of those sons are with him at home. They're already in the king's service. This is around the time of David and Goliath. In fact, that's the story that comes next in the Old Testament. And these brothers are faithful to Israel, supporting their king, wanting to do everything they can to defend their land against the Philistines and to keep God at the heart of things. And one by one, the prophet Samuel is made to go through this thing where he looks at each brother and God tells him whether he's the one or not. So we start with the oldest, and Samuel is thinking, oh, this looks like a good, strong, wise man, the kind of person you would have looked up to as a king, and God says no. He goes through all 7 brothers, and God says no. Finally, Samuel asks Jesse, well, do you have any other sons? And they say, well, there's just the one. But he's so young and insignificant that he's still sitting out in the field looking after the sheep and probably playing the harp, as we understand. And so they have to wait for David to come home after his shift in the field. And when he walks through the door, Samuel knows. This is 1 Samuel chapter 16, if you want the story, because it sets out beautifully the way everything is descending into chaos and anarchy and doing the wrong thing within King Saul's reign, and yet behind the scenes God is always doing the thing in the tiny place where nobody else is noticing that is going to change everything. And when David comes in, God says, this is the one. And when Samuel is asked, why him? There's an amazing and beautiful answer. We look at the outward appearance. God looks at the heart. And so with a long-winded and very painful story, in the end, David becomes king of Israel and is known by many as Israel's greatest king. At the end of his reign, he has defeated every enemy that the people had. His wife gives birth to a son called Solomon, who he sets up to be the king after him. And David purchases the land on which the temple is to be built and the amazing wood from Lebanon and other materials that are going to be needed to build it, leaving the task to his son, because David's time has been a time of war and not peace. And what is starting with King Solomon is a time of prosperity and peace with the nations, where things can be built so that they can establish the worship life of Israel in its permanent place where God always had provided for it to be, the same place that was associated with Abraham and others as God's holy special mountain. And King Solomon is asked, what do you want? You can have anything. And he asks for wisdom. And because he asks for the right thing, God says, well, you can have all the gold and wealth and riches and peace and everything else. And other things go wrong later. There was this beautiful moment at the end of King David's reign and the beginning of his son Solomon's reign. But this heart that David had, that you can see written in the Psalms that he wrote and the Proverbs that he wrote, and in the description of him at his best when he's not making a huge mess of things. And you can even see it in the times when he comes back and repents for the massive mistakes that he's made. You can hear the man after God's own heart. Well, where does this come from? Part of it is his own will, part of it is the gift of God, but part of it is this family line in which we have Ruth the Moabite marrying Boaz, the lovely Jewish man who wants to do the right thing. You can trace it back to Rahab in Jericho, the Canaanite chief prostitute who helps the Jewish spies and becomes grafted in to the line of David and eventually of Jesus. That heart comes from somewhere. That's why the book of Ruth is there. It's all leading up to this moment of seeing it's obvious who the choice is if you see the way that God sees our heart.